Hey, how's it going, folks? I'm going to talk today about the Illearth War by Stephen R. Donaldson, or Stephen Donaldson without the R if you're in the UK. So this is a US edition trade paperback that came in a box set, all three of the books. This is the second in the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever, the trilogy. So there's one book to go after this. And it's absolutely brilliant, by the way. I don't know how I've ended up reading this again. It just, talk about mood read. I read Lord Foulsbane again last year with a good friend of mine. A friend of mine that had never read any fantasy at all. And it was a fascinating journey to go through that chapter by chapter with him and discuss it every week for the podcast. But then I didn't follow up straight away. I suppose I was kind of hoping that my pal would be up for doing it again, but I feel that he isn't, and I don't really want to ask him because in case he feels obliged. Not that he would, but So I picked it up myself because I had just read The Lord of the Rings again, first time in at least 20 years since I've read that, and that was a pure mood read as well. That came to me through listening to a podcast about The Lord of the Rings called The Rest is History. I was like, oh, yeah, I want to read that again. And I did, and it was brilliant, and I've had the best time. And going from that, I just felt like The Lord of the Rings leads to Thomas Covenant for me because it's my favourite fantasy series. I think I've read this 3 times now, and the second Chronicles, which is the next trilogy, I've read more than 3 times. And I thought I preferred the second Chronicles, but now I'm starting to wonder, because this bloody hell. So obviously we're following the main character, Thomas Covenant, the anti-hero from Lord Foulsbane. So for those that don't know, I'll briefly give you a synopsis. He's a leper from our world, living in America, in Haven Farm, and his wife and child leave after he's diagnosed, and then he gets ostracised by his local community. They don't want a leper coming into their shops and getting in the way, and so he ends up going into town to pay his bills, and as he does, he gets run over by a car, or hit by a car, or maybe he just faints in front of a car. We're not quite sure, but when he comes to, he's in a fantasy land called The Land. And it's a beautiful place. The way that Donaldson writes about this land, particularly Andalane, the hills of Andalane, it's just a place that I would love to live. And the characters, Saltheart Foam Follower, one of my favourite characters, Banner the Bloodguard, again. So in the second, at the end of Lord Foulsbane, he ends up back in our world, having, completed the quest. And the second book takes us not that far into, there's not much time has elapsed between Lord Foulsbane and this one in Covenant's world. But in the land, is it 40 years or 70 years? Would you think I'd know that, having just read it? A reasonable period of time has elapsed. It's 40 years. So when he goes back, some of the same characters are there, but there are a few new ones, including a secondary point of view character. I'm loath to talk about spoilers because, but at the same time I want to. It's like, I won't though. I'll keep it spoiler free. Suffice it to say that for those of you who've read the first one and quit when the despicable act happens, and if you know what I'm talking about, and you feel that he wasn't suitably punished for that, then, the second book, the consequences of that incident are writ large, and, the punishment for him, the anguish, the angst, it's paid back big time. And during this fascination period of mine that I'm enjoying this world again, I started looking at Stephen Donaldson's gradual interview which he published, I think, between 2004 and 2011. So readers would send in questions and he would just gradually add them to the bottom of the list. And one of them asked about the incident, and this is what he says here. He replies, "I'm always saddened to hear that someone has quit reading when, say, the incident happens. I certainly understand such a reaction. When I get the chance, I say several things. 1. I write about tormented characters because no one else could possibly need the story as badly as they do, and it is in the nature of tormented characters to do tormented things. 2. If you quit reading, you'll never find out why I wrote what I did. If you do go on, you'll discover that what I did is not gratuitous. That, in fact, the whole subsequent story is about the terrible consequences of such violence. 3. Terrible things happen in the real world all the time. God knows they happen to me. If I'm not willing to write about those things, I pretty much have to give up my claim on being a serious writer." So he wrote that on the 13th of April 2004. There you go. So the Illearth War, yes, big battle scenes. It's called the Illearth War for a reason. There are wars. And some of the battle scenes are incredible. And the scene that's depicted on the cover there. Interestingly, I was watching The Lord of the Rings with my wife just as Saruman was getting beaten up by Fangorn. Like, does that remind you of anything? She's like, that, no way. It's not derivative though. It's very, very different. Of course, there are trees that, you know, you're always going to get crossover, I think, with epic fantasy, at least in some level. So, I don't know, maybe it is derivative in a sense, with the trees and the White Wizard and the lords with their magic and all that. It's like, yeah, but I forgive that. Did I read this before The Lord of the Rings? I read them about the same time, interestingly enough. I'd be in my late teens, early 20s. So I guess I just love fantasy, so I don't care if it's derivative or not. Yeah, so the POV characters, the way that the structure of the book is not quite like, say, Brandon Sanderson, where you get POVs switching, so you're following the same timeline from different parts of the world. It follows half of the characters as they go to war. A bit like The Lord of the Rings, actually. Oh, there we go. Derivative structurally as well. We get the first characters going to war, and then we get the second characters, which I suppose would be similar to Sam and Frodo going off to Mordor to Mount Doom. So, yeah, I'll give you that one. But as I say, if you love fantasy, why would you not want more of it, you know? And the second half, when we follow Covenant and the High Lord to do their quest, yeah, it's big. And I remembered a little bit what happened, but not enough that it was spoiled. So it was still like pure edge of the seat stuff. And this, you know, I read this in like 5 days, I think. I just couldn't stop. Nor could I resist picking up the next one, which is The Power That Preserves. So I'm into that one already. What I hadn't read before was Gildenfire. So this is an outtake from the Illearth War. And in the beginning, Donaldson explains why it was an outtake. Well, firstly, because his publisher wanted him to cut stuff because the book was too long. But secondly, because this follows some characters who leave the main quest and go off on a sub-quest. And we know that he's called Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever because Covenant believes that the land is a delusion of his, that it's not real, so he doesn't believe in it. If we follow POV characters who are going away from Covenant, then that kind of presupposes that the land is real. So at least for us, the reader, it can no longer be considered as unreal. That's what he says, but then in the actual book itself, you know, as I've just explained, you get another POV character who's doing his own thing while Covenant's off on his own quest. So it doesn't really stand up what Donaldson says about the outtake. Nevertheless, it was interesting to read. It's basically a chapter that's been lifted out the book, and you can quite happily ignore it, as I have done for my first 2 reads at least. So, but it was good to read it this time around and get that extra little bit about what happens on that particular sub-quest. So, yeah, the characters, the new High Lord, I think I can say without spoiling it, she is a phenomenal character. She's a little bit underwritten, I think. We don't really get as much of her motivations as we might. Although we do get some, and there's a family connection that I can't go into, but I feel that she could have been a bit more fleshed out, but then that would have added more pages perhaps. But I'd have been fine with that. More pages is good if it fleshes characters out more. So, yeah, in that regard. And also, I was going to say there are no giants in it. There are giants in it, which I can't explain. Spoilers and all that. But Saltheart Foam Follower's not in it. And it's never really touched upon why he's not in it. And I miss him because, he's awesome. So, there we go. That's the Illearth War. It's a series that came out in 1977. This was 78, I think it was published. So, it's kind of written in the heyday of the birth of epic fantasy. It was a good time for epic fantasy, following in the coattails of the Lord of the Rings, and yet it's I'll say it's unique enough. Unique isn't something that you can have grades of, is it? It's different enough to make it really worth your while. And for me, the idea of having an externalized baddie that one fights, that I think is what draws me into this book so much. Imagine if you could take all of your character flaws, all the things you hate about yourself, and put them into something that you could fight. How that would feel. And for a leper to be in this land that actually cures his leprosy. Not only that, it adds more vitality than he ever would have had without leprosy in our world. The vitality of the land is a huge part of this, which is another thing that keeps me coming back, is the land itself. It's such a wonderful creation. And I just wish I could go there. You know what I mean? Anyway, there you go, the Illearth War, part 2 of the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever. If you haven't read it, I'm going to be shouting about this series for the rest of my life, I'm quite sure. So pick it up and give it a try and get past chapter 7 of the first book, because, as Donaldson says, bad shit happens all the time. So, deal with it, get on with it, and learn about the consequences, because boy does it pay off. Cheers.